You off easy this time.
This is the hardest I've struggled to get footage for a video. But here's how this deck works. 80% of this deck's power comes from its interaction with pranks and curious shellfolk. You can generate an absolutely disgusting amount of value through this combo. Then using your two champions, you can grind out your opponents with all the cards you've created while slowly burning them out. But here's the catch. To outvalue your opponent with Curious Shellfolk, you need to be able to play Curious Shellfolk. And to play Curious Shellfolk, you need to make it to turn 6. You then need to stabilize long enough to actually be able to use all the cards it's making you. This means you need to survive the onslaught of mid-range aggro and burn decks running around right now, and there's a lot, and I mean a lot of them right now. So this deck equips itself with tons of flexible removal to try to get there, but before we continue, let's talk about the champions in this deck. Vi is the most loved champion from League of Legends. She has her own banger of a song, an upcoming animated series, and on top of all that, she's gay. And this deck is gonna need the love, cause the other champion is a love-deprived child with abandonment issues. But let's start with Vi. Vi was the first champion in Legends of RUNETERRA to be nerfed to the point of being killed off. And this is all they did. This little adjustment to her HP killed her. And since then, Vi hasn't been able to find a home until now, over a year later. But let's get on with it. Vi is a 2/4 for 5 mana with Challenger and Tough. Her ability is when she's in your hand or on the battlefield, she gains +1 attack whenever you play a card, capping off at 8, making her a 10/4 for 5 mana if you play enough cards. Her level requirement is striking with 10 or more power, and keep in mind this does not specify how she gets that power, so go wild with these. When she levels, her base stat line goes up to a 10/5, and she gains the ability when I strike a unit while attacking, that part is important, deal 5 damage to the enemy nexus. So just keep in mind that she needs to be attacking while striking, so blocking doesn't count and strike spells don't count unless you're mid-combat on your own attack. You'll be using Vi for one of two things. Either you'll be using her to stabilize on turn 5 to prep for your Curious Shellfolk on turn 6, or you'll hold her for the late game to burn out your opponents with her level 2 ability to chunk the Nexus punch for punch. And if that doesn't work, we have another champion who packs less of a punch and more of a poke, but lots of poke. Ezreal is kind of a douche. He's the guy you'll see on Tinder talking about how a boy in Africa changed his entire life. And like many of those guys on Tinder, it stems from a place of hurt. Ezreal is a 1/3 for 3 mana with elusive and, when I strike, create a fleeting mystic shot in hand. His level up requirement is targeting 6+ enemies, not including the Nexus. His level 2 adds the text, when you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to the enemy Nexus. If that spell targeted an enemy, then it deals 2 damage instead. Ezreal is a really annoying little fucker, I'm not gonna lie. I hate seeing him. When he drops on the board, one of two things will happen. He'll either die immediately to removal, or he'll get you a ton of free removal and paying out all of your opponent's early game units. And the worst thing about him is they gave him a low attack to compensate for a stronger HP pool to make him especially annoying to deal with. Much like Vi, Ezreal is here to help you with your late game burn. Ping the enemy Nexus for 1 or 2 damage every time you cast your enormous amount of spells, whether they be your pranks, mystic shots, or whatever shenanigans you could take from your opponent's hand and deck. Now the strategy with this deck is easy on paper. You have a ton of spells to deal with all different sizes of units from big to small, while dropping Otterpusses, to generate pranks to hold them for turn 6, or to cast them to slow down your opponent. But actually getting there is much more complicated. This deck is a very strong lesson in resource management, as you'll need to use your mana wisely from turns 1 to 6 to guarantee you don't fall too far behind. Now the main point of this deck is Curious Shellfolk, which says when you pick a card from a randomly selected option, create a copy in hand and reduce its cost by 1. If you haven't caught on by now, this works with pranks. So every time you cast a prank, you get a copy of it, and this is before the prank debuff applies. So you get the original copy, and your opponent gets a dogshit knockoff. So this deck is a classic case of control grinder. The grinder part means not winning through a few powerful late game cards, but through a bottomless pit of inconveniences. With this deck, you're winning when your opponents are top decking and scrolling through their phones while you're busy reading what all your new cards do. Every time I got to turn 6 and dropped a Shellfolk, my biggest worry the turn after would be, am I going to lose a card from having a full hand? And that's after getting through turns 1 to 5 constantly removing threats. There's not a lot of advice I can give you guys. Although I lost a lot of games with this deck, this is by far one of the most exciting decks I've ever played. Every game is different after turn 6. Before that, it's a clever mind game of resource management, but after that, once you drop your Shellfolk and start stealing cards, your resources to finish the match are usually going to be very different from game to game. This is a very strong deck. I didn't have a lot of success with it, but that might be different for you. I recommend this deck heavily since if the meta does slow down with the upcoming 2 expansions, I can see this deck being one of the stronger control deck options, so you might as well learn it now. Thank you everyone for watching, that's it for me. The next guide video might be something different. I have a half-written script that I'm kind of liking, so I might do that, but I'll still focus on Legends of Runeterra content. So don't worry if the next guide isn't Legends of Runeterra. I'm still going to be focusing on it. So, anyway, good luck everyone on your games, and I will see you all next time.